Los Angeles. Late in the year 2002. A soundstage on the edge of the city, cold in the way those big empty rooms always are, no matter how many lights are burning. The set was dressed to look like a swap meet after dark. Folding tables, cheap tinsel, a row of fake storefronts that would never sell anything to anyone. And standing just off camera, in a suit loud enough to be heard from across the room, was a young comedian most of the country had never seen. His name was Katt Williams. He was not a movie star yet. He was barely anything at all in the eyes of Hollywood. A club comic with a reputation among people who stayed out too late and laughed too hard. But tonight, he was about to shoot the scene that could change every part of that. And a few feet away, watching him the way a builder watches a wall he is not sure will hold, stood Ice Cube. What Ice Cube was about to say to him, quietly, in the last minute before the cameras rolled, would follow Katt Williams for the rest of his life. He did not know it yet, standing there in that loud suit, but the next few hours would decide whether Hollywood ever gave him a second chance. Everything he had worked for was about to be pointed at a single camera. But to understand why one sentence mattered that much, you have to understand how far that young man had come to be standing in that cold room at all. To picture Katt Williams in 2002, you have to forget everything that came later. Forget the sold-out arenas. Forget the specials people still quote word for word. Forget the name that would one day fill a marquee by itself. Back then, he was a road comic, a man who had spent years working rooms that most people would never set foot in. Small clubs, late shows, crowds that had already been drinking for 3 hours and were not there to be gentle. He had learned his craft in the hardest school there is, the one where the audience can turn on you in a single, silent second. And he had survived it. More than survived it. On a stage, with a microphone in his hand, he was one of the quickest minds anyone in those rooms had ever watched work. He could read a crowd like a page. He could take a heckler apart and somehow make that heckler love him for it. But a film set is not a stage. On a stage, Katt Williams controlled everything. The timing was his. The room was his. If something was not working, he could feel it and fix it in real time, live, in front of everyone. On a film set, none of that was true. There were marks to hit. There were takes to match. There were dozens of people standing in the dark, waiting on him, on a schedule that cost money by the minute. The thing that made him great in a club, that live, dangerous, unrepeatable energy, was exactly the thing a camera could kill. And everybody on that stage knew it, including him. The role was Money Mike. Anyone who has seen the film knows the character now, but in the fall of 2002, he existed only on paper and inside the head of the young man who had to bring him to life. Money Mike was loud. He was flashy. He was the kind of character who could tip over into a cartoon in the wrong hands, a joke that laughed at itself instead of with the audience. And that was the trap. Because the easy version of Money Mike was safe. Play him big, play him broad, let the suit do the work, get the laugh, and go home. But Katt Williams did not build his whole career on the easy version of anything. He understood something that took other performers years to learn, if they ever learned it at all. He understood that the biggest laughs come from characters an audience secretly believes in. That underneath the loudest man in the room, there had to be a real one with real pride, real nerve, and something real to lose. He wanted Money Mike to be funny, yes, but he wanted him to be true. The problem was that truth like that is hard to fake on the fourth take when the lights are hot and a room full of strangers is watching you try. Katt Williams had done it 1,000 times on a stage where the electricity was real because the audience was real. Here, the only audience was a camera and a crew who had seen everything. He had one job that night: make the loudest character in the movie feel like a human being. And he was not yet sure the film set would let him. Now understand who was standing across from him. Ice Cube in 2002 was not just an actor on that set. He was the reason the set existed. He had come up out of one of the most important movements in American music, a young man whose words had shaken the country and made the whole world listen, whether it wanted to or not. And then he had done the thing almost nobody in his position manages to do. He had reinvented himself. He had built a second career in film, not as hired talent, but as a man who created the projects, wrote them, produced them, carried them. The Friday films were his. He had dreamed them up, fought to make them, and turned them into something a whole generation loved. So when Ice Cube looked at a young comic and decided to put him in his movie, that was not a small thing. That was a man putting his own name, his own audience, and his own reputation on a bet. He did not have to gamble on Katt Williams. There were safer choices. There were bigger names. But Ice Cube had watched him work, and he had seen the thing that only real performers can see in one another. He had seen that this young man was dangerous in the best way, that he had a fire most actors could only pretend to have. He believed in him. Which is exactly why what he said, in the last minute before the scene, carried so much weight. Because it did not come from a director trying to get a shot. It came from someone who had already bet on him, and needed him to bet on himself. The night of the big scene came the way those nights always come, slowly and then all at once. For hours the crew had been building toward it. Lights were moved and moved again. The set was checked and rechecked. Somewhere off in the dark, someone called out numbers and times that meant the moment was getting close. Katt Williams stood at the edge of it all in his costume, and for once in his life, he was quiet. The men and women who worked on that film would remember it later. They remembered a performer who, on a stage, would have been talking, joking, filling every silence. But here, waiting, he had gone still. He kept running the scene in his head. He knew the words. The words were never the problem. What he did not know was whether the thing that made him special would show up when the camera did. Because here is the fear that lives inside every great stage performer who steps in front of a lens for the first time. On a stage, you are alive. The audience feeds you and you feed them back, and the whole thing burns bright because it is happening once and will never happen again. A camera does not feed you anything. It just watches, cold and patient, and asks you to be electric all by yourself. Katt Williams had spent his whole life being lit up by a crowd. Now he had to find that same fire in an empty, silent room. And a few feet away, Ice Cube was already walking toward him. Ice Cube did not make it a speech. Men like him rarely do. He came close enough that the crew could not hear, and he said the kind of thing that only lands when it is said quietly. He told the young comic to stop trying to be a movie star. That was the heart of it. Stop reaching for the film. Stop trying to fit into what a camera was supposed to want. He reminded him in a handful of words of who he already was. That the room where he was most alive, the club, the stage, the crowd, that Katt Williams was already better than almost anyone in the country. He told him to bring that man to this set, to stop treating the camera like a judge and start treating it like the best seat in the house, to do exactly what he did every night for a live crowd, and to trust that the truth of it would carry. It sounds so simple, but simple truths are the hardest ones to hear when you are afraid. What Ice Cube gave him in those few seconds was not a note about acting. It was permission. Permission to be himself in a place that had made him feel like himself was not enough. Katt Williams listened. He did not argue. He did not nod too much. He just took it in, the way you take in something you know you will carry for a long time. Then someone called out that they were ready, and the young comic walked on to his mark, alone, with those words still warm in his ears.
What happened next is why the people who were there still talk about it. The scene began, and for a moment it was just a young comedian in a loud suit hitting his mark. And then something turned. The fear went out of him. The stiffness that lives in every first-time film performer, the little hesitation of a man checking himself against the camera, it simply left. And in its place came the thing Ice Cube had been betting on all along. Katt Williams stopped performing for the film and started performing like the film was a room full of people who loved him. He was loud, yes. He was flashy, yes. But underneath it, in every take, there was a real man in there, proud and quick, and daring you to look away. The crew, who had seen 100 actors do 100 scenes, felt the temperature of the room change. People who were supposed to be working stopped to watch. Money Mike was not a cartoon. He was alive. Take after take, the young comic did the impossible thing he had feared he could not do. He found the electricity of a live crowd in a cold and silent room, and he held it all by himself. When it was over, there was that particular kind of quiet that falls on a set when everyone knows they just watched something arrive. A character had been born. And so, in a way that no one announced but everyone felt, had a movie star. The part that would introduce Katt Williams to millions of people was now on film. And it worked because of a sentence spoken in the dark a few minutes before. When Friday After Next reached theaters, audiences met Money Mike, and something happened that even the people who made the film did not fully expect. He stole scenes. He stayed with people after the lights came up. Fans left the theater quoting a character played by a comic most of them had never heard of before that night. For a lot of America, that was the first time they ever saw Katt Williams, and they did not forget him. Everything that came after, the specials, the arenas, the name that would one day stand on its own,
ran back through that cold soundstage and that loud suit and that one quiet sentence. Because the danger had been real. He could have played it safe. He could have given a big, broad, forgettable performance and walked away just another comic who tried a movie once. Instead, in the last minute before it mattered, someone who had already bet on him told him to bet on himself. To stop chasing a version of himself that Hollywood might want, and to bring the real one. It is a small thing when you write it down. A few words on a film set 20 years ago. But that is how careers turn. Not in the big, loud moments everyone can see, but in the quiet ones almost nobody does. Most of us have had a night like that. A moment when we were about to reach for someone we thought we were supposed to be, and someone who believed in us leaned in close and reminded us who we already were. Katt Williams walked onto that mark alone. But he did not walk on empty. He carried one sentence with him, and it was enough.